pardon me, I was just decomposing. But for really good live music, may I recommend Debut Atlantic? They're currently touring the Atlantic provinces with some of Canada's finest classical musicians.
I have so many great things to say about Debut Atlantic. I have so many great things to say. I'm having a hard time articulating myself.
I got a call from two people, both who were in Ottawa at the time. Ed Oscapella, who was the music officer with the Canada Council Touring Office, and Karen Kieser, who was then the executive producer of a program called Arts National, which at that point came out of Ottawa. And they were saying, do you think there are any sponsors in your area that would like to have Canadian, wonderful Canadian performers perform in their venues in the Maritimes? And I said, well, I'll check it out. So Michael is one of the people I found.
And we sat around and talked, and he had all these great ideas. I said, yeah, I want in.
Yeah, Michael had already had a series, so he was a perfect match. Basically, it was an opportunity to expose this talent to an audience that wouldn't normally have the chance. This sort of three-way partnership. We have the Canada Council, we have the CBC, and we have the local community presenter. That's how it all began, and it's grown since then.
As a Maritimer, it was great to kick around my neck of the woods doing what I do. And I had a really great time, particularly in Newfoundland, because they can party it up right. But New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and PEI also gave me a wonderful welcome. And there are no other audiences that'll bring big foam #1s and wave them in the audience and scream and whoop and make me feel like I'm the best thing since sliced cod.
In many cases, some of the sponsors weren't in a position to provide the kind of publicity. Many of the artists were just starting out. They didn't have this big machine behind them to promote them. So he said, what we're going to have to do is get a little promotion. Can we get a person involved in this to actually work in making sure the artist has a good photograph? There are some publicity materials, posters, press releases and stuff like that, and kind of get the beginnings of an infrastructure.
So in the first 2 years, there were concerts. Canada Council would fly a person in, CBC would tape them, then they would fly home. But after a while, they discovered that they weren't getting the audiences they wanted. In one case, there were 12 people in the audience. And in a week's time, there was a broadcast live across Canada on CBC Radio at the Arts and Culture Centre in St. John's, Newfoundland, and only 4 tickets had been sold. So that was when the Canada Council phoned me and asked me would I come in and help get a few people in the audience. Turns out the person that was performing was totally unknown, 21 years old, really talented, but how could we sell him? Well, he was also very, very charming, and he took every interview we could possibly line him up for. And we got 400 people in the audience. They loved him, and John Kimura Parker was on his way.
But Leeds is also a city of stately buildings, and since 1963, the site of one of the most important piano competitions in the world. Hundreds of aspiring concert pianists try to take part. About 100 are accepted. Only 6 make it to the finals. This year, for the first time, 2 of those 6 were Canadians. Louis Lortie of Montreal finished 4th. John Kimura Parker of Vancouver won.
Debut Atlantic gave me my first break. I mean, really my first break as a performing artist. I was 19, I think, and I got a phone call from Adrian Hoffman, and Adrian said, you know, I have this idea for a series and I'd really like you to come and play it. I don't remember how it is that Adrian first heard me play, but CBC keeps their ears open, they always have, and somehow he knew about me and he believed in me. And I cannot tell you, as a 19-year-old who had just moved to New York, how unbelievably important it was for me that somebody believed in me. And that's how it started.
So on the way back from St. John's, Newfoundland, I said to Adrian and to Michael Steinitz, you know, this is a really wonderful project, but you know, why stop at one concert? Why don't you tour them? Why don't you charge every sponsor something, not a lot, but something, and spread the sort of the CBC fee over all the dates. And they said, oh, what a good idea. Why don't you propose that to the Canada Council? I have since thought that maybe the two of them had already plotted this, and they just manipulated me into thinking I was coming up with it.
And it evolved into a directorship of an entity which became a separate organization called Debut Atlantic, which ultimately acquired a board of directors and now is an entity unto itself.
At the very beginning, when I was very new to the concert presenting business, I felt very soon that the job deserved the attention of a professional. And if there wasn't going to be a professional, then I was going to try and learn to be as professional as possible. And I learned at the feet of some great teachers. There was Dawn Harwood Jones and there was Adrian Hoffman. We have small communities which are a perfect fit to the small ensembles. It's been affordable and it's been absolute, and this was the genius of it, the first class. It was there was never any question that any music would be acceptable except first class.
Debut Atlantic is a great organization. I was 15, I think I was 15 or 16 when I went on my first tour of that part of the country, and it was thrilling for me. The audiences were fantastic. They were so warm, very, very grateful. A lot of young people that were enthusiastic about music and the arts, which I found very refreshing. And the organization of Debut Atlantic was tremendous.
I like to say that I've done enough tours now that it's been a few years since Debut Atlantic, and I have to say that it's very well organized. Everybody's always there to greet you. The presenters are always so excited to see you. And I don't know, it's just, in all my tours, it was probably the most fun that I had.
The artists didn't know how much they could be appreciated. They were young, they were definitely on the way up, they were polished, it was the best music, but they still had never gotten it, how special that they could make people feel by showing up in their little town and playing for them.
Halifax now has a roster of performers that are the pride, if not world class. They're national artists, and I think having top quality performances, world class performances, anywhere is going to help.
Well, it develops the hunger.
It develops a hunger, and it develops the standard that people can shoot for.
The hunger can only happen if they have a role model, if they've seen this.
And if they've been exposed to it.
In my first year of producing concerts in Antigonish, I had a marvelous pianist with a Leventritt Fellowship, and he came, and there was a young student. She was in her fourth year piano student, and she said, can I have a master class with him? Yes. And she went to the master class, and he took one look at her, and he said, young lady, you're ill. You have a high fever, don't you? And she said, yes. And he said, go home and go to bed. And she said, no way. And she said, no way. She said, no, this is very important to me. He said, why? She says, I've never heard a professional musician before. She was a fourth-year piano student, and she had never heard a professional pianist before in her life. And he said, okay. He said, I'll make that's the other side, that you meet wonderful people in this business. And he said, good, you sit down and listen with your fever. I'm going to play the concert for you, and then you're going to go home and go to bed. And he played the whole concert for her.
Wow.
And he said, now off with you and go home to bed. And she said, I'm going home to bed, but I'm coming to the concert after that.
You know, there are dozens of stories like that. I remember the one in a regional, what do you call it, a consolidated school in Summerside, PEI. We had a brass quintet come in. And all day long, the recording mobile we parked up next to the school was buried in snow. I mean, the snow was flying, was coming down. Here we are in it's not even downtown, and it's in a rural area, district school, which serves the whole area. And we're thinking, you know, we're just gonna have a studio session tonight. We're not gonna have an audience. So there I was, pacing up and down in the hallway, looking out the door with the snow beating in, and all of a sudden I started seeing lights. These headlights come. You know how that when you see headlights through the snow, they look very eerie. One after another, they're driving in, 50, 60 kilometers away from Charlottetown, from Summerside, because they don't have a concert every week of the year.
We had the worst storm ever in Fredericton that time.
That's right.
At the Playhouse. And we came back, and tons of people came. They came on cross-country skis.
That's right, that's right. Cross-country
it was
skis.
Well,
snowmobiles.
We had a pretty stable audience through the mid-90s, but by the end of the 90s, we felt that it was time to have a different kind of strategy for audience development. So we had the idea of including writers on an encore tour. And we wanted to have people who had a very high level of name recognition. So we started with Mordecai Richler. Well, I have to tell one more about Mordecai Richler and Immaculata Hall. He had chosen the most salacious excerpts possible from Barney's version, and we were all concerned because he was going to read these excerpts in Immaculata Hall. The sisters were there. So I called him up in London and very gingerly broached the subject, can you imagine, of censorship, after all, with Mordecai Richler, who was a long pause, and then he said, Brinton, there's only one thing worse than censorship. That's stupidity. So anyway, for a week, we were touring around, and I'm nervous about this. Finally, the big night comes. We're at Immaculata Hall. After intermission, Mordecai comes out, and he says, my minder, Dean Brinton, has asked that I not read a particularly salacious excerpt from my novel in these hallowed halls. I will therefore read the most boring possible section of my novel, and proceeded to do so. And he droned on and on for 10 or 15 minutes. And after the concert, the sisters came up to me and said, Dean, how could you do this to us? How come we don't get to hear what everybody else gets to hear? And complain bitterly about it. So
they'd all read the good bits.
They'd all read the book.
People that didn't really get a chance to hear me as a professional.
I'm sorry. Are you filming right now?
Yes, she is.
Oh, sorry.
What are you doing to me?
Misha Bruker-Gosman. He's fabulous.
You're just trying to lighten me up, right? Oh, boy. Okay. So, on that note, see, this is a good example of what Debut Atlantic's like. You know, just random things happen. You know, it's my turn in the camera, you know? Give me a chance.
I inherited this wonderful organization. It was healthy. The lucky part of it was that I had toured with it, so I understood what this meant to an artist, the experience of of having a debut tour. The board is so wonderful about, I mean, they're fiscally responsible, and they want to do things with a solid plan behind it, but if they don't lose sight of their creativity. So they want the best young artists in the country. That's a given, that's our mandate, and to give them that exposure and touring experience. But then if there's other projects you come up, like Dean came up with the author series, which has been terrific. And so I went to a Symphony Nova Scotia concert and heard Alistair MacLean's big work with a symphony and a big choir, and I was sitting there, and I had done mostly new music as a pianist, and I said, I need a composer in residence, or not me, but Debut Atlantic needs a composer in residence. We're the only music touring company in Canada that has a composer in residency program. So it's been fabulous. So he writes for the artists, he goes to all the schools, he works with everybody from composition university students right down to you know, K-6 kids. So we're up in little junior high up in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, and we asked, you know, the music program if some of the kids want to come down and play some of their stuff for Alistair. And we have Dr. MacLean here. He's been the Symphony Nova Scotia composer, and he studied in New York. And so they said, sure, that would be great. And then these three young guys walk in, and they got the punk hair, and they bring in their hardcore rock equipment. They got the mics, they got the drum set, and they're called Albert and the Naked Chefs. This is great. So you know, so I was just sitting there, and they're thinking, oh, we got this stuffy old composer guy, right? Well, then they play a song, and they're doing their headbanging thing. Then he gets up and he tells me, you know, I used to play in a rock band in high school, and hair down my waist. Well, they just perked right up, right? So then he starts, you know, they start playing through their piece, and so he said, after you do this riff, if you just stop